The Great Escape, the unforgettable saga of Stalag Luft III. Chapter 1. Heroes in a Steel Cage. It was a freezing January morning in 1943. Deep within the dense pine forests east of Berlin, near the Polish border, stood a complex that was the pride of the Third Reich, Stalag Luft III. This was not your typical run-down prisoner of war camp. Described by the Nazis as the unescapable fortress, this place was a laboratory designed by the era's most brilliant engineers, psychologists, and security experts. Every corner of the structure, every strand of barbed wire, carried a single message: there is no way out. Inside were held the brightest and most daring minds of the war. Heroic pilots from America and Britain. Just months ago, these men were masters of the clouds at thousands of feet. But now, they were mere numbers, cramped into dirty barracks at ground level behind barbed wire. However, the Germans made one fatal mistake. You can bring an Allied pilot to the ground, you can clip his wings, but you can never extinguish his thirst for freedom or his desire for retribution. Managed by the German Air Force, Luftwaffe, this camp differed from the other bloody death camps of the war. It was intended for high-ranking officers. The German command employed a classic psychological warfare tactic. They believed that if prisoners were given luxuries like a library, a theater, and even a swimming pool, their fighting spirit would break, and they wouldn't risk trying to escape. A certain sense of gentleman's conduct, a fake courtesy, prevailed among the officers. Sometimes there were even exchanges of cigarettes or coffee between guards and prisoners, but this was merely the curtain of a bloody theater. Every pilot's mind revolved around a single question, like a ticking pendulum: how can I get home? Because no matter how much Shakespeare you read, or how much volleyball you played, you knew you were under the cold gaze of an SS officer at every morning roll call. At any moment, you could be executed by a Gestapo decree. This comfort was, in reality, like the last meal of a victim awaiting an inevitable end. Engineering the impossible. The Nazi trap. The Germans implemented ingenious engineering solutions to prevent escape, making Stalag Luft III the most secure location in the world. First, all barracks were built on stilts, approximately 12 inches, 30 centimeters, above the ground. This allowed the guards, known as ferrets, to inspect under the barracks at any time and immediately notice any clandestine digging. Nothing could escape their eyes. Second, the soil beneath the camp was specifically chosen: bright yellow, sandy soil. If anyone began to dig, that bright yellow sand brought to the surface would immediately scream, "I am here!" against the grey topsoil of the camp. Every crumb of sand was a potential death sentence. And most terrifyingly, seismographs. The Germans placed sensitive microphones deep underground along the perimeter of the camp. The slightest sound of a shovel, a bucket hitting the ground, or even the weakest vibration could trigger a red alert in the guard towers. But for Roger Bushell, all of this was just an interesting puzzle to be solved. The prisoners referred to him with reverence as Big X. Big X and the three brothers, Dick, Tom, and Harry. Roger Bushell's plan was so ambitious, so unthinkable, that even his closest friends initially thought he was mad, that he had lost his mind under the stress of war. He proposed digging not one, but 3 massive tunnels simultaneously. He named them Dick, Tom, and Harry. Bushell's logic was the move of a brilliant strategist. If the Germans found one, they wouldn't think to look for another. If they found 2, they wouldn't suspect the existence of a third. This was diversification of risk. Under Bushell's leadership, over 600 prisoners transformed into a secret army. This army did not fight with weapons, but with intelligence, and patience. Some were engineers, some were skilled tailors, and others were master forgers. Everyone had a mission. The secret army of penguins. The biggest technical problem was the sand. Where to hide tons of yellow sand? This is where American ingenuity and the ability to improvise came into play. The prisoners sewed secret pouches into old shirts and trousers that extended down to their ankles. These bags were hidden inside the pants and operated by a string from the pocket. These men, nicknamed penguins, would walk around the campyard pretending to just take the sun, while pulling the strings to slowly drop the sand onto the ground. Then, other prisoners would play volleyball or go for a run to kick the sand into the topsoil. Hundreds of penguins circled the camp daily. The German guards, ferrets, laughed at them. These poor British and Americans have gone mad, walking around aimlessly all day. In reality, they were executing the greatest engineering operation in history, step by step. The underground subway system. The tunnels were at a depth of 30 feet, approximately 9 meters. This was deeper than the hearing range of the German seismographs and microphones. But at this depth, there was another killer. Lack of oxygen. What did the prisoners do? They built a magnificent, hand-operated ventilation system, using tin cans, old milk jugs, and rubber hoses. They even went so far as to build a small railway system inside the tunnel. They made rails from old bed slats and wagons from food tins and wheels. The Harry Tunnel was no longer just a dark hole. It was an underground industrial hub operating in silence. Hundreds of kilograms of sand were transported in these wagons every day. Chapter 2. Shadows and Forgers. While the Harry Tunnel slivered silently underground toward the woods, another secret war was being waged above ground: logistics and intelligence. It wasn't enough for a prisoner to just get outside the camp. He had to survive in the heart of the Third Reich, surrounded on all sides by Gestapo, SS, and a vigilant civilian population. For this, they needed escape kits, survival packages, the shadow economy, the power of chocolate and coffee. The prisoners knew that every man had a price. Towards the end of the war, the hungry, weary, and future-fearing German guards were no exception. The chocolate, coffee, and cigarettes from the Red Cross packages coming from America and Britain were more valuable than gold, even diamonds in the camp. The prisoners used these treats to buy some of the weaker-willed guards. But this wasn't direct bribery. It was a subtle mix of psychological manipulation, blackmail, and friendship. Some German guards began secretly bringing cameras, civilian clothes, train schedules, and even special inks needed for forged documents into the camp. In exchange, they received luxury American chocolate to send to their families. Thanks to this secret trade, the prisoners obtained the latest railway maps of all of Germany without ever leaving the camp walls. Artists and forgers. The shadow cabinet. In a corner of the camp, in a place everyone assumed was an art club, the greatest forgery operation in history was taking place. Using toothbrushes, broken pens, and pigments obtained from plant roots, these men created identity cards that even professional Gestapo officers couldn't distinguish from the real thing. A perfect cover story was crafted for every escapee. One was dressed as a French laborer, another as a Swedish businessman. They were taught the appropriate accents and given forged tickets. Old army blankets were dyed and tailored into modern European suits, and compasses were fashioned with precision from food tins. This was the pinnacle of art in a game of life and death. The loss of Tom. The breaking point of hope. In the summer of 1943, while everything seemed to be going well, a great disaster occurred. The German ferrets discovered the Tom Tunnel during routine inspections. A guard had accidentally spilled water on the ground and saw it seep rapidly into the earth. This meant months of hard labor and thousands of hours of risk were wiped out in an instant. As the Germans blew up the tunnel with dynamite, the prisoners watched with cold-blooded composure. But inside, a volcano was erupting. Everyone had one fear: will they find Harry too? Following this event, the Germans maximized security and doubled the number of guards. However, this did not stop the escape committee. They began to move even more secretly and cautiously. Now, all hopes were pinned on Harry. Chapter 3. The night of March 24th. Into the darkness. Finally, the big and bloody day arrived. March 24th, 1944. For the 200 men planned to escape, the tension was unbearable. Hearts beat so loudly, it felt as if they could be heard from outside. But that night, Mother Nature decided to show her most ruthless side to the prisoners. The ground was covered in freezing snow and ice, and the temperature dropped to -15 degrees Celsius. The first disaster. The short tunnel. When the final exit hatch of the tunnel was cautiously opened at 10:15 p.m., the first escapee, Johnny Bull, was met with a terrifying sight. Blood froze, breath caught. The tunnel did not end within the thick trees of the forest as calculated, but several meters short, in a completely open area. The exit hatch was right under the guard tower's searchlight, looking like a black hole in the middle of the snow. This was the greatest calculation error of the plan. But turning back was suicide. They set up a rope system. When the man hiding in the woods pulled the rope, it signaled, "The way is clear," and the next prisoner would crawl through the snow in the darkness toward the forest. The process was agonizingly slow. Every second felt like a century. Instead of the planned 60 people per hour, only 10 to 12 managed to escape. The second disaster. Chaos from the skies. In the middle of the night, while tension was at its peak, the sound of engines was heard in the sky. Allied planes began bombing nearby cities. An air raid siren went off in the camp, and all lights were extinguished. While this initially seemed like a chance for the escapees to hide, it actually disabled the handmade lighting system inside the tunnel. A scene of total chaos and hell erupted underground. People tried to climb over each other in pitch darkness and in that narrow, damp hole where oxygen was completely depleted. Someone would scream. Someone else would lose consciousness from the lack of air. Furthermore, the sound of bombs outside increased the risk of the tunnel ceiling collapsing. 4:55 a.m. The beginning of the end. Morning was approaching, and the horizon was slowly turning white. The 76th man had already reached the forest and was breathing the cold air of freedom. But as the 77th man lifted his head from the hatch to exit, a German guard happened to walk right toward where he was standing. The guard accidentally saw that black hole in the middle of the snow. A moment of silence. The eyes of two men met. And then, whistle blows, machine gun fire, and screams filled the freezing air. The escape had been discovered. Chapter 4. The Wrath of the Gestapo, and a tragic end. The 76 men who escaped were already scattered across Germany. Some were trying to reach Berlin by express trains. Others were attempting to reach neutral countries, Sweden or Spain, by walking through forests. But when Hitler received news of the escape, he completely lost his mind. He took the escape of so many people from such a high-security location as an insult to the Third Reich and himself personally. The Hitler Order. Bloody retribution. Adolf Hitler personally issued a bloody order. Shoot everyone who is caught. This was a flagrant violation of the International Geneva Convention and all laws of war. Even some German generals balked at this cruelty, but Himmler and the Gestapo hurried to execute this bloody command. In the following weeks, the largest manhunt in history was launched across Germany. Of the 73 officers caught, 50 were secretly executed on lonely forest roads and various paths. To cover up this crime, the Gestapo added notes like "shot from behind" or "killed while trying to escape" to the official documents. These heroes, including Roger Bushell, stood tall even in their final moments. 3 men, the surviving miracle. Of the 76 men, only 3 managed to achieve true freedom. 2 Norwegians, Per Bergsland and Jens Müller, and 1 Dutchman, Bram van der Stok. They crossed thousands of miles by sea and land, leaving 1,000 dangers behind to reach Britain. They hadn't just survived. They continued to make the enemy bleed in the skies until the end of the war, to avenge their comrades. The legacy, the price of freedom. After the war, Allied forces formed a special investigation team to find the killers of these 50 officers. Most of the Gestapo officers who committed this crime were found, tried, and executed. Today, Stalag Luft III is not just the ruins of a prison, but remains in the golden pages of history as a symbol of the victory of the human spirit, unbreakable intelligence, and unquenchable courage against tyranny. Every pilot who gave his life in that dark tunnel under the freezing snow proved one thing to the world. Freedom is never free, but every breath given and every sacrifice made for it is worth it to the very end. Their story continues to burn like a torch in the hearts of freedom-loving people.